Welcome back to season 2 of the Four Gardens podcast. I'm Jake Ifshin. In this episode, we'll continue focusing on health, which is the first garden in the Four Gardens approach to self-cultivation. Today, I'm joined by Kevin Platt. Kevin is a bodyworker, movement teacher, and human experience enthusiast. He has a deep respect for the wisdom that lives in the human body and spirit, with special interest in learning the subtleties of the human nervous system. I'm joined today, as always, by my co-host and producer, Ari Rubens. Ari, what really landed for you in this episode with Kevin?
Well, I've known Kevin for a couple of years, and his voice and his presence has always electrified me with energy. So even if I was speaking a different language and I listened to Kevin Platt, I would feel much better by the end of the episode. So just the energy that Kevin brings really moves me. And the way he explains a lot of the concepts that I've tuned into with self-inquiry are very well articulated. And I could really tell he's done a lot of work in his life. So I'm really excited to bring Kevin Platt onto the Four Gardens podcast.
I just agree with everything you said. And I found that talking to Kevin, I find myself slowing down when I'm around Kevin. It's part of his message in this episode is how to slow down, how to listen, how to breathe more deeply with more awareness. So that I got that out of this episode, listening to this. I feel like he really is aligned with the approach we bring in the Four Gardens podcast here, and had a lot to share that really meshes with what we do and our intentions here of growing a life of balance and caring for yourself. So this is a really solid episode, and I am excited for you to listen to it. Before we jump in, I want to remind you to like and subscribe, leave reviews, leave comments. Any way you feel inspired to react really helps to this podcast, and we love hearing from you. Of course, donations also help. You can find the link in the description box to donate, and stick around to the very end of the episode for a health tip from Ari. Now that we got that covered, let's jump right in. Hey, Kevin, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, brother Jake. Good to be here with you.
I've known you for a number of years now, and I met you through conscious movement, yoga communities, dance. And something I've always admired about you is the way you move your body, your balance, your dexterity. That was the first thing I noticed about you, which is it's kind of hard to miss because you're often doing acro yoga and just killing it on the dance floor. So that's the first way I think I noticed about you when we met through dance. And it's something I admired about you because I saw in you and your movements just something I want for everybody, really, in their health, in their body, is being able to move the way like you do with the ease and the dexterity and the creativity, the flow. Something I think that we're really reclaiming as humans and bringing back to ourselves in this modern society.
Yeah, thanks for reflecting that. I feel like there's a reconnecting with that animal part of ourselves, and that's definitely a big part of what comes up for me in dance space, acro space, all the spaces you just mentioned.
Well, it's super fun to dance with you and do acro. I know it's gonna be super fun to talk today with you as well. And something we talked about before you came on was that you already have a philosophy around health, personal philosophy around health. You've developed what health means to you. So I thought maybe we could start. I just want to invite you to share what health means to you.
Yeah, totally. So health for me is like the word that comes up most for me is balance, creating balance in myself in any given moment. And it's really like a constant inquiry into what would bring me more balance, in asking my body to offer me through my senses and through an inner conversation, like, hey, what do I need? And that's kind of the macro, or the micro rather, for the macro question I would ask the world too, like in terms of collective health, community health, political health, all these different things. Like, if I can ask myself, where is balance wanted, then it's the same question that I am asking for the world. And in that way, I feel like I'm creating a healthier world by taking care of my own balanced health. Um, the second thing that comes up there for me is like, I always say to people, there's no owner's manual for this life. So like everyone has their own answers to that question, that inner question of what would bring me balance or wholeness, integration, um, in any moment that we ask ourselves that. So, I mean, I think it's a journey, and for me, it's been a journey of really feeling into what brings me health. So that'll be, part of our conversation, I feel, and just checking into the modalities I've explored in my life, all the dance floors that I've been on that have offered me the chance to ask that question of myself and also to see others doing the same. So there's a big like we're social creatures. So I think health heart starts in us, our practices, asking the question, and then also being in a social space and feeling that question kind of in a group field in some ways.
We'll get into the journey too in a minute that you were offering of, but I want to pause for a second and look and just get a little clarification for what that means too. When you talk about inner conversation, you talk about that inner conversation you're having on the dance floor. I just want to maybe get an example because I kind of feel like I know what that means, but I wonder if people listening could use a little more example of that. Maybe an example from your life of recently where you've had an inner conversation moving towards that balance.
Yeah, so I think a lot of it is trying to feel into the what comes up for me is like the switchboard on a sound switchboard where you put certain knobs up, certain down, and so in moments on the dance floor when I feel like things are going a little too fast for myself, I'll ask, the main question that comes out is, what do you need right now? And I'll kind of send that voice through my body and see what energy comes back around, like, hey, maybe slow down a little bit right here, or take a pause and like receive information as opposed to adding the next 5 or 10 movements and kind of getting in some ways like lost in the sauce or lost in the next moment. But it's just a constant self-inquiry for me of like, what is that sensation I'm feeling, behind my heart in this moment? What is that kind of formless voice that I'm receiving that's saying, like, hey, I could use a little bit slower movements, or can you put me on the ground for a moment and like let me feel this connection to earth and a stable force underneath me. So just a constant like conversation with my body and this like bottom up approach as opposed to the more cognitive, like, all right, I'm dancing. What did I bring in tonight? How do I want to move that? It's more like, hey, body, can you tell me what is sensually happening here so that I can, receive information more than like tell you where I want you to be.
And there's a spirit of play, I'm imagining too, right? In that conversation, especially on the dance floor, there's play. Just I see you nodding, and I just imagine that that's part of what the dance floor offers. And then I'm also thinking that you're playing with it on the dance floor, but then continuing that off the dance floor too. That conversation is continual, right? Where you're turning up the volume on the dance floor, but that conversation continues for you, right? Beyond the dance.
Yeah, definitely. That's I think for me, the mindfulness practices that I check into are what kind of keeps a steady stream of that self-inquiry happening.
Yeah, I think this connects. We can talk mission statements and men's work later in the conversation. Looking forward to getting to that. But one part of my mission is deepening awareness. I use those words in my mission statement, and I see you doing that. I think it's something that I want to listeners to take away from this podcast too, is by listening to these conversations and listening to this conversation too, it's how can we elevate our awareness around the conversation we're always having with our bodies all the time, whether it's any kind of setting, not just dance floor, but when you're going through the hardest times and the best times. Because even in the best times, when I'm most vital and most alive, I notice that conversation, I can turn the volume down at that extreme moments of the dance. It doesn't necessarily have to be the hard times, but the good times too. I might injure myself because I'm rock climbing too hard, because I'm not listening. I'm having too much fun, or having a crazy dance. So I think that's something I want, though, is that awareness of where is the volume level? How am I listening? I want to grow this for myself. How am I listening to my body as I move through life?
Yeah, I definitely hear you there. There's what comes up for me is just deeper connection to subtleties and continuing the journey of like being in this human vessel that's giving us so many cues all the time.
Love it. Let's get into your journey. You said journey again. Let's talk about where this started for you. I know it's you went through a health challenge that kind of got you really started on your path. Does that feel like a good place to start talking around your journey with these practices and your health?
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely one of the most impactful moments of my life, and I feel like there was the way I related to my body before this spinal infection that I had when I was 19, and then the way that I relate from then to now. And it kind of came out of nowhere. I was a rower in college and just kind of felt invincible, was doing all kinds of different movements. And yeah, basically after my first semester of college, I got this spinal infection, lost 30 pounds in like a month, and basically my body completely changed. And yeah, I was in the hospital for a while, had a permanent IV, and really had to do some deep treatment. And it changed the way that I basically talked and listened to my body, in a way of, more asking the question, what do you need? And making a request through my movements, through my breath, through deeper ways of connecting and listening that before I just really didn't have to. Like, it was all kind of there for me movement wise and whatnot. So in some ways it feels like it was like an awakening of sorts. It really brought a spiritual aspect to my connection to my body and a deeper listening to the emotional part of myself of like, what is this bringing up? And uh yeah, it gave me a chance to really feel into the depth of which I want freedom in my body. Like I want the space and the deep connection there in order to explore in this life. And so I had this really beautiful chance to kind of really slow the heck down, be in the hospital for 5 days, and then I went through another kind of near death experience alongside it in the hospital. So it put me back in for 6 days, and I really just had to slow down, come into my breath and like listen for kind of the blueprint of my body to do the healing for me as I was patient, and developed this new outlook of really like honoring and bringing deep reverence to these healing vessels that we have. Um, I feel like that's a good little chunk about that.
I mean, hearing that, just starting in on that, we're touching on a common theme in these episodes of having health taken away, what that means to people. I'm hearing how this infection and being in the hospital threatened your health, and took away the freedom of movement you enjoy, forced you to listen. And an important piece of this, where this health journey takes us, I find, is towards spiritual connection, deeper connection to the body. And you mentioned all those things that spiritual connection came out of this for you, not just embodied a different view on your body. So along the way, were there different points or a point you could zoom in on where when you were threatened, when health was threatened, you chose, because something I'm curious about here too is when guests don't choose the victim route, they choose whatever route that will be more empowering, more taking them further towards their higher self, towards their goals. So was there a moment along the way where you had those two options of going maybe a more negative way with the health challenge or a more like destructive way of perspective, and you chose something different?
Yeah, I remember being in the hospital and just having a deep meltdown. And it felt very much like a identity or kind of ego death of like, this is the way that I deeply saw my body, the movements I could do, the way I was kind of moving through life, and then having this meltdown and kind of through it, like feeling like I had a choice in some ways to kind of like back away from it and shrink and be like, why is this happening to me? Like, the doctors told me this type of infection you got, most people get when they're younger than 7 or over 70. So it was like every doctor just told me, oh, you got bad luck, basically. And so there was the ability to be like, why me, and really sync with it, or to really like sit in that hospital bed, like find my breath and be like, what is the gift in this? What is this experience bringing me? And the the level of gifting that experience has given me since and during, like it's one of the things that I'm most grateful for in this life. And so there was definitely a specific moment in the hospital, just moving through that meltdown where it was like, yeah, I want to receive this. I want to integrate this experience and flow with it the best that I can.
What practices really supported you that you already had in that time of health crisis? And then also I want to hear how that affected your journey afterwards with those practices.
So when I had the spinal infection in the hospital, what came in to kind of walk with me as I was moving with that experience was there was some breath work already in my body and in my experience of just tuning into the breath when things got overwhelming or when I needed this to kind of sink into my body some more. So there was some of that. I also had nature on my side, just in feeling into, I remember looking out the hospital window and there were like 2 trees I could see. It's like, hey, trees, what's up? Like, you got nervous systems out there and you're doing the thing, being with the storms, being with everything moving through. So there was kind of this just like nature support there for me. I remember tuning into that. And sinking in. I've always been pretty spiritual. This experience definitely like expanded that big time. But I remember just being like, I accept this experience. I'm really grateful to have this life that I have. And even though I'm going through some of this mud, like there was a lot of believer in me showing up. So I'd say those few things were kind of what I walked into into the experience with. And then moving forward, like I had some experience with yoga. My dad did yoga when we were kids, but it really expanded deeply. Going back to college, and I signed up for this yoga class that was a 1-credit class. The teacher taught 3 of them in a row, and I would just stay for all 3. And I wouldn't like push my body to do everything. It didn't feel like I was in that mode of like need to heal and fix and, get there. It was more just like I was so drawn to being in somatic practice space and alongside others, especially students doing it and really like learning about ourselves and learning about our bodies. And so yoga really deepened there for me. And I was 20 then. And it was 3 years later that I actually did my yoga teacher training. But it was just a couple years of really diving into the yoga practice and learning some about the philosophy there and deepening into this kind of 5 body approach that yoga offers: mental, physical, emotional, breath, and spiritual. And the big thing that came home for me there was just the word of balance and integration, especially like integrating it's not just a physical practice. Here I am breathing and weaving all of it together in a way where I can experience the parts of me that wanted to be integrated, the parts of me that wanted me to slow down at that time. And so, over the next few years, getting my teaching, and starting to do personal training, teaching yoga, being in a YMCA with so many people where I got to really sit with their bodies and my own and just continue that like self-inquiry question and offering that to others. So it became, a professional lens that I added to that. And then what started to come through was like, what else? What else is out there? So, eventually I did a breathwork training, and it really delivered me to what feels like a base life level practice of breath, where it's all in the breath, a complete expansion, a complete contraction, one after the other, and just rinsing that experience into my body over and over and seeing where it touches, seeing what wants to expand, what wants to contract, and honoring the connection between the two. So breathwork has become a really deep practice for me. Yep. And so exploring different modalities, breathwork, these different practices that are now very somatically attuned, like, which is what I'm speaking to, of asking the body, hey, what do you need? What's going on in this part of you? The somatic experiencing and taking a training called alchemical alignment, which is basically just somatic inquiry practicing and sitting with movements of energy in the body that you could kind of simplify down to nervous system movement. So fight, flight, freeze, without getting too deep into that, just, what's needed for a part of you that, say, wants to flee, wants to freeze. And can I bring the breath in there? Can I bring that nature connection I spoke to? And any other resource that's available to let my body digest and integrate whatever's present in that moment. And along the same journey, there's been, men's work and group field holding that has helped me along with this somatic attunement and learning my body and how things move through it more. And also dance. Dance has been huge. I've been on conscious dance floors in conscious dance communities for about 10 years now. And it's just a constant, I always say, like, it's the best therapy I have. It's almost like going to movement and spirit church. So, all of those different practices have a space for me in any given week and like season of my life.
Thanks for sharing that map of the practices you have. And I can see how, based on what you're saying, a lot of them trace back to or were strengthened by the health crisis you had and the realizations you had then, and are also are part of you now. I can shared a lot of those practices with you too. I wanted to ask about that word somatic before we moved on to the men's work, group field work. Are you using that word interchangeably with body, or does it have a special meaning when you talk about somatic?
Yeah, it feels like body, and for me, it doesn't mean not the mind. It just means like attuning to all of this physical self, every part of myself that um, that is a map for the life that I've lived. Like every single experience in my life lives in this body.
So also then theoretically, would you say that the moment you had communing with those trees or being in nature could have be a somatic practice? If it's impacting your being, your cortisol levels, your mental state, or your physical, it's all of it, right? It's a kind of holistic word that goes beyond body, what we're talking about. And I would say it seems like
Definitely.
you're connecting it to the practice, to the listening and the balance are some of the intentions of somatic practices. The goals of higher listening and greater balance in life are deeply intertwined with the somatic journey.
Definitely. The word that shows up is relationship, like constant relationship to body through the soma. And that same thing comes through with nature, the soma of nature. So when I feel into a tree, I'm not just feeling into the tree, I'm feeling into my body in relationship with also.
That's really cool. Yeah, there's something that brings it all together for me around that word. I see why you use it, and I know it's got a lot of power in a lot of the practices we work with too. And two of those practices you just talked about were I love are the men's work and the conscious dance. So I want to talk about those a little more, because I know we're going to get pretty jazzed up on either of those subjects. And so you talked about dance first. Let's do that. So that is incredibly somatic, and for me, affecting my whole being. Let's talk about dance more, because I think we got into it around the same time. I know I started dancing with Ann Kite, who you also dance with a lot too, I know, and work with. She's been on the podcast. Really recommend people checking out the Ann Kite episode if they haven't heard it yet. She's an amazing teacher. Also, Omar Aina is another big dance teacher out of New York City we've had on. That's a great episode. So check those out if you're interested in just a deeper dive into conscious movement. But for you, you said you started your journey 10 years ago. That wasn't too long right after your health crisis with your spinal infection. Is that right?
Yep.
Pretty close to that time.
Mm-hmm.
Talk about getting into that, your first time conscious dance, and what did it mean to you getting into dancing?
You know, I've always loved just free flow movement. So I remember in college going to bars, like, and it just never fully fitting. And then I remember I drove a couple hours to Philadelphia from Salisbury University, where I was attending, and with another yoga teacher friend. And we took a class there, you know, a waves class, 5 rhythms. And I remember just be like afterwards not having words and being like, what was that? Like being on a dance floor for it was either 2 or 3 hours, no words, and like no substances, just people moving how they best want it, or however fit best for them. Um, and feeling like I was not only meeting myself in deeper ways of this kind of conversation in some ways without words, but also with community and having this chance to, just like the relationship with the tree that I brought up before, having these other human and animal bodies to really reflect to me and to reflect back. And it's like each person on the dance floor, I feel, has a certain medicine for the world, for me, if I'm just open to attuning to what's on each dance floor in me and around me. It's one of the biggest gifts I feel on a dance floor.
There really is something magical about that, of how our nervous systems regulate all together when we're in a group. I notice the difference in me dancing. I dance alone and I dance in groups, and I can see the powerful difference between those two. And the same with breathwork. So I talk about this with Mallory Kambamal, breathwork teacher episode, what that experience of breathing together means too, and how even singing in churches or in synagogues or wherever you pray, it's really moving air together is prayer, is why we have these shared songs in some deeper way. We want to breathe together at a really deep level. And I think it's the same with dance too. Also a part of every tradition has its shared dances. And I think, what does that do? Like, what is this inner need, this incredible impact? I'm like programmed to dance with other people. I'm programmed to breathe and sing with others. And it's like the impacts of that, I feel like I'm still unpacking, like, or trying to understand how that's the level of depth, like that hits me as a human being. So it seems like you share that feeling too.
Oh yeah, big time. Humans have learned some about the actual physiology happening there, and it's also a mystery. Like I hope for all of our sakes that we get to just keep exploring with that like invitation of mystery.
Oh, that's a little MKP. It's a little cultural appropriation, but we say that in the Mankind Project too, when we really agree with somebody's statement too, or what they're sharing. And I feel that interest in mystery. And speaking of ancient human practices, sitting around a campfire in a circle, sharing as men, sharing with women, sharing as in a community, as everybody together. I think it's another ancient practice that that's very human, that is important to me. I know is important to you too. So let's talk about the MKP piece too, and the Mankind Project, how that's shaped you, how you've worked with that.
Yeah, sounds good. So Mankind Project, I started in 2014. So that was like 5 years after the spinal infection. And since it's really developed for me, having started another men's group just in community, kind of with the bare bones of an MKP men's group, but also growing into like what is the community wanting to co-create there. And with the men's work, uh, I really had a chance to step into this weekend that was my launch into it and take a look at deeper parts of myself. Really get clean and understanding on the clarity um, around like where I wanted to point my energy and my life towards. So you could call that mission. And also just getting a chance to look at the kind of the unconscious parts of myself that were showing up and how they were driving my mission. So you could call that like gold mission versus shadow mission. Shadow, the parts of ourselves that we hide, deny, or repress. So in some ways on that weekend, I really got to start to check into, the blanket modality of shadow work and see what was inviting my nervous system to freeze in a moment, to fight, or to flight. And so that was a good entry into nervous system dynamics as well. And there's just something super beautiful to being in a male-bodied container and full of men that are just waiting to listen and bring in this nice mix of like masculine and feminine holding, where I was listened to as a man. What is your experience? And also as a human, what is your emotional experience here? What part of your body is that message coming from that is a shadow? What part of your life, like the earliest parts of your life that started to guide that energy? What was that? Can we like back up however many steps needed to really feel into the root of these patterns that were guiding me? And so I got a chance to really do that on the weekend, and then to hop into a men's group right after, do some training on the the structure of a men's group, and then two, I've been in the same group for 8 years of doing, I like the term like sacred theater, where men will hold different roles for you in a process of emotionally pulling parts of myself out so that I can see what things look like in relation to family, in relation to community. Um, and yeah, so there's this really beautiful archetypal holding there that comes through. You know, in MKP, they a lot is drawn from the book Lover, Magician, Warrior, King. And I remember just getting into that archetypal um, listening, which has directed a lot of the self-inquiry that I do these days. Like, how am I feeling in my warrior? How am I feeling in my lover, my king, my magician, and the emotions that are associated with each? And there's even, practices of connecting with nature in that way, facing the east and checking into the lover, the south, the warrior, and moving through. Um, so men's group brought me that inquiry, that male-bodied container, to have elders to connect with and whatnot. It brought me this deeper connection to like archetypal understanding of myself, which kind of brings me in some ways back to that mystery that you and I just talked about a couple minutes ago of, why did someone at some point look to the east, a group of people, and say, oh, that's lover energy, and watch the sun come up, every day and start to love up on this planet and on us. And so there's such a depth to a lot of the practices and ways of seeing life that I really found in that introduction to MKP and communities like that.
Definitely resonate with that. And I'll say that men's work, if you're feeling inspired hearing Kevin share about this and you want to join a men's group or even women's group, I'm less connection to, but feel free to reach out to us, fourgardenspodcast@gmail.com, or reach out to Kevin if you're a friend. And there's a lot of great ways to get involved or to get into a group, possibilities for you. Because it's meant a lot to me too. A lot of what you said reflects my experience. And I'll just share, I think it's confusing for me, for many other men, to be a man at this time, to be in a male body. I think there's a lot of change around building a positive identity as a man. You talk about shadow work versus gold work too. We talk about, I've had Kevin Halber on, who's the leader of my men's circle, who's part of, we're an MKP group too, gold mining circle, where we really focus on our mission and what we want in our lives. And so much of this male energy in the world, comes, we take responsibility for the destruction of male energy going sideways, of male identity being not grounded. And we talk about somatic practices on this, awareness, connection to nature, connection to the feminine in us too as men. There's so much work to do, I think, for me and for other men now. And I don't believe it's possible to do that work alone. Like, I don't think that by ourselves, any of us are capable. I'm certainly not capable of doing that work alone. That even the most powerful men and the most amazing men I know have really, I would say all of them have surrendered to some kind of vulnerability in the group to group processes and one-on-one of asking for help outside ourselves. Like, I don't think I know any great men who I haven't done that. And I think it's essential. I think it's probably one of the most damaging elements of toxic masculinity is the idea that we need to go it alone and be strong and silent. That I think that is one of the most terrible parts of toxic masculinity, is that every man should do this alone and never ask for help. And I think that leads to some terrible outcomes of the high rates of suicide we see among men in this country. MKP is a direct answer to that problem. It was created out of men coming back from Vietnam and not knowing what to do with themselves and needing support groups. And it was for veterans originally, and now it's really for all men. And then there's women groups for women too that are very similarly inspired, such as the Woman Within. And I'd say that that impact of like, we need that as men in the society. Men need these places to go and do self-inquiry and to do this healing work. So thanks for being a champion of that out there, Kevin.
Yeah, right back at you, brother.
Let's talk about self-inquiry for a minute too, because I know that's important to you. It's been a theme in this podcast. I wanted to invite you. I hear you doing it in men's work and other places, but if there's just a little more you want to share about the self-inquiry practices you use day to day, how you stay curious, stay aware of yourself and learning about yourself, love to hear about it.
Yeah, thanks for asking. What comes up for me there is just movement and stillness practices. So, taking time away from phones, potentially outside of walls, and really getting to a place where I can inquire within. So for me, that really comes through in nature. Like when I step out my backyard daily, put my bare feet in the ground and take a little walk into the woods and just start to tune in, start to notice, like, where is my body being pulled? And literally sometimes I'll just walk out without a plan and see where my body wants to walk through this beautiful forest we have out back. And, certain days I'll end up sitting on a log, closing my eyes, choosing whether I want a specific type of breath. So often I'll just pick like deep diaphragmatic breaths so that I can really feel the center of my body and let my diaphragm move, which deeply connects to, you could go real deep in this, the vagus nerve and the nervous system and many other physiological processes that allow me to just notice, like, hey, what energy is in my system? Does it want to move? And do I need stillness right now? Do I need movement? So that's more of a, walk somewhere in the woods, sit, get some stillness in there, allow the movement of breath to come in and touch what it needs to touch, and ask the question, what do you need, part of me? How can I be with you? How can I like sit with you just as if I would sit with a friend? And then movement wise, like, I am such a kinesthetic human that a lot of my practices do have lots of movement to them so that I can really embody. And dance is the first one that I think about. I dance basically every week, twice a week. And that's very much a listening practice. Let my body move where it wants to move. There's no formula. There's just breath, movement, and sound. And I get to play within the realm of those three. And, at times I'll just put on 10 minutes of music and dance and shake and move around enough and be like, okay, that's enough for now. I have something to go do or whatever. Every Friday night I go to Ann Kite's dance class, 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock. And then I'm in community, like you were speaking to, like, can't just do it alone, or you could, but there's so much I receive from being in community, and I do believe humans are social creatures. We do need that and crave that community regulation and love. So for me, a big somatic practice and chance to dive into self-inquiry is by putting myself in a place where I'm with many loving mirrors walking around that have hearts and nervous systems and are really doing the same thing as me, just next to me in their own way. So yeah, community, nature, movement, and stillness practices. Those are the first ones that come to mind. And I guess also I do have, in terms of a very structured, like, masculine way or just structured way of giving myself what I need, every morning I do have a non-negotiable practice of like 15 to 20 minutes of qigong and ending in a little time to just receive what came through there.
Those are some powerful practices. Thanks for sharing that. And before we close out here too, I want to give you an opportunity just to share about some of the offerings that you're giving to the community right now that are, you know, your work and ways people could connect with you and benefit from some of these practices and learn them, because you really have developed quite a lot of expertise and knowledge and depth around your work. So definitely recommend people working with you.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. I mean, I'm a yoga teacher and a body worker by trade. So I absolutely love sitting with people and being with that conversation of self-inquiry and bringing in resource. And so I do sessions, massage sessions, and also like that alchemical alignment program I did, sessions where we sit with regulation and bring in resource in order to settle. And so that's kind of the one-on-one. I do group work in terms of teaching yoga. So I have a website that I'm redoing in this moment and teach 6 classes a week. So I absolutely love having new people in the yoga room. And yeah, after I travel in August, I'll be coming back and launching some more different workshops on breath work, nervous system connection, mission work, different workshops I've done in the past that are all written up, and I feel like so much juice in my body right now just sharing. Like, I absolutely love connecting in that way. So that's what I'm offering kind of these days and looking into the next few months.
Happy to promote that, the current offerings and future offerings here. And so check the links in the description box. We'll share all of your information down there if people want to connect with you too. And I just also wanted to see if there's any question that I didn't ask or any other topic you wanted to address today before we end the podcast.
Yeah, I feel like there's just one piece I want to say about the world that we live in and how fast-paced it is, and
Please.
how, you know, capitalism, consumerism, et cetera, et cetera. Like with these practices, something that really comes through for me is slowing down and getting out of that collective energy, taking a step, and like nature tells us that it has its own pace. It doesn't need to be forced or moved too quickly. So in talking and sharing these somatic practices that might, you know, have the undercurrent of shadow work or of like, you know, need to do healing work, any of this stuff, it's more, I really want to bring a more receptive energy to that. And that's what I want to share with the world, is stepping back and seeing like from within what is wanted. When we have so many messages outside of us that say you have to do more, you have to consume more, you have to share more in order to be blank, whatever word comes there for you. So for me, it's just these practices help me to get away from that and remember that there's a life force energy coursing through each of us that wants to be, I believe, seen, felt, and allowed its own pace.
That message is very aligned with my own values and the intentions behind the Four Gardens approach. I am thinking about self-cultivation as something that we don't need to spend so much money. You know, how we grow, how we heal. You know, the last episode too, Umair and I talked about this too, low-hanging fruit. We were just how much medicine is free and in our bodies and in community. There's so much that we can do. Like, really, I think preventative medicine should be 99% of where our energy goes. Like, I think that most of the energy, I mean, 99% is extreme, but I feel pretty extreme that most of the energy should be going to keeping ourselves healthy while we're in all the phases of life. and not consuming mindlessly in all kinds of ways, and slowing down are just core to what I think we need in this time. That you talk about 15 minutes of qigong, or I think about 15 minutes of seated meditation, what that does for my day, my nervous system, how it shifts things, how a hug can change things in a minute, how a joke or a laughter or a conversation, how much that can mean. I think that we're starved. I think societally starved of some of these things, and they accumulate, and how we I'm sure we can have a whole other conversation about how we hold our bodies. I've learned a lot about this lately in my body, how we hold our bodies, how we move through the world, and the health impacts that has too. So that's a whole other topic. But I think that all of that cumulatively adds up to major health crises down the ways and challenges that are preventable. And so I think that, and even on top of that, I just want to live a really joyful, fun life. And my body and my spirit, this is the vehicle I have to do that in this life. And so I think everything you talked about today is, I really share so much of these values and practices of getting myself there, getting my community and others there. It's a lot of that is just in this conversation of the most powerful things we share to get there. So it's been really beautiful talking to you today. Thank you for that.
Yeah, thanks for kind of weaving it all together there at the end. And I've really appreciated spending this time with you, sharing, hearing, and yeah, being with you today, brother.
Feeling is shared. I'm grateful for you, Kevin, and you taking the time today to have this conversation. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you too.
Thank you so much for listening to my conversation with Kevin Platt. I love talking to him, and I feel inspired to do some of the practices now that we talked about in this episode. We had a lot of shared practices, and I could just feel how much they benefited him, and it reflected back to me how important these practices are to myself. And speaking of practices, we have our co-host, my co-host and producer, Ari Rubens, is here to share his traditional, now every episode, health practice that he's offering after the episode. What's up, Ari?
Great. The health practice I would like to recommend you tune into is on listening and how I practice listening, and recommend to my students to listen to the body and to the mind. I love this episode, and it reminded me of a practice that I do. So in a yoga class or in a walk in the woods, there's always an opportunity to do this. Take a given amount of time, 1 to 2 minutes, and instead of following a guided breathwork practice or exactly what the teacher is recommending, close your eyes and tune in to your body through a body scan. So you go from the top of the head down to your feet and then back to the breath, and don't change anything. Just be with the breath and develop inner intuition, because you have your own inner guide and inner teacher that can teach you so much about healing and growth.
Thank you, Ari, for that tip. I feel like that really goes along with the theme of this episode Kevin brought, of listening to yourself and noticing. It's just such a great chance and practice to bring your energy into balance and your body into balance and awareness by doing that. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you again to everybody for listening today. If you love the health tip, leave a comment. If you have a question about this episode or anything that came up for you, we'd love to hear about it. So comments are always welcome, and reviews. Go ahead, and any interaction really helps this podcast. And so please, looking forward to hearing from you. Thanks again, and keep on growing.